What happens when a bold cop lies under oath to take down an innocent black father? He thought no one would challenge him until Judge Judy stepped into the end to see how she flipped the courtroom and ended his career in just 2 weeks. The courtroom was packed to the brim that morning in downtown Los Angeles. The air felt heavy, not because it was hot, but because something big was about to go down. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as the bailiff called out in a sharp voice, "All rise." The crowd stood up in silence as Judge Judy Sheedlin entered the courtroom with the authority of a storm. Her sharp eyes swept the room like radar. She knew this case was different. She could feel it. A black father was accused by a white police officer of resisting arrest and endangering his own child. But something about the report just did not sit right with her. The details were too neat, too perfect, and perfection in police reports often meant one thing. A cover up. Judge Judy sat and gave a nod. Everyone sat back down in a wave of creaking benches. The first witness was already seated. A police officer named Daniel Hicks. He had served the LAPD for over 15 years. He wore a crisp uniform and a look of confidence. Maybe too much confidence. His eyes darted once toward the defense table where the accused father sat quietly. His name was Marcus Williams. He was a delivery driver. No criminal record, no history of violence. Just a father who had gone to pick up his son from school. Judge Judy looked down at her docket and then fixed her gaze on Officer Osser. "Hicks," she said firmly, "may proceed with your testimony." Hicks stood up straighter. The wit in question, he began, "I observed Marcus Williams no stopping zone in front of the elementary school. Who was hidden in his school. When I asked him to move, he became aggressive. He shouted at me and refused to comply. I asked for ID, and he began to reach inside his vehicle in a suspicious manner. For officer safety, I drew my weapon and ordered him to step out. Judge Judy squinted slightly and held up a hand. "Officer Hicks, did he threaten you?" "Not in words, ma'am." Hicks answered, but his manner was threatening. His tone, his refusal to comply. His body language. "So no verbal threat?" she asked again. "No, ma'am." "And no weapon?" "No, ma'am." Judge Judy jotted something in her notepad. The courtroom was silent enough to hear the pen strokes. Then she turned to Marcus Williams. "Mr. Williams, did you bring your child to court today?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus said calmly. "He is with his mother outside in the hallway. We did not want to bring him into the courtroom unless absolutely necessary." Judge Judy nodded. "Fair enough. Tell me your version of what happened that day." Marcus cleared his throat and sat forward slightly. He wore a white shirt and dark pants. No fancy suit. Just a man trying to keep his dignity intact. "I got off work early to pick up my son Jamal," he said. "I parked in front of the school, like I usually do. It was dismissal time. Kids were coming out. I was standing next to my car. Not inside. Not blocking traffic. Just waiting. And then Officer Hicks approached me and asked why I was parked there. I explained I was just picking up my son and would be gone in a minute. He told me to move the car immediately. I told him I understood and would move as soon as my son came out. Did you raise your voice, no, Your Honor? I spoke respectfully, but he kept escalating. He asked for my ID. I told him it was inside the car and I would get it. When I reached in to grab my wallet, he pulled his gun and shouted at me to freeze. My son saw the whole thing. He had just come out the front doors of the school. He started crying. Judge Judy looked up sharply. You are telling me your child witnessed a gun being drawn on you while doing nothing but reaching for your ID? Yes, Your Honor. That is exactly what happened. I froze. I did not even touch my wallet. I put both hands up and told the officer to stay calm. I did everything I could to keep the situation from going bad. Judge Judy turned back to Officer Hicks. Officer, you claimed he was reaching in a suspicious manner, but by your own testimony there was no threat, no weapon, and no actual refusal to obey your commands. That is correct, ma'am. Hicks replied a bit less confidently now. So let us be clear. You escalated the situation from a parking violation to a use of force scenario in front of a school full of children and witnesses. Officer Hicks hesitated. His jaw tightened. I followed protocol, ma'am. Judge Judy's voice was like steel. Protocol does not mean terrorizing a father in front of his son. Do you have any body cam footage? Yes, ma'am. Submitted into evidence this morning. Good. We will play that now. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the clerk connected the video feed to the monitors. The footage began to play. It showed Marcus standing calmly by his car. He greeted a few other parents. The officer approached. Words were exchanged. Then Marcus opened his car door and reached inside slowly. No sudden movement. Nothing aggressive. The officer pulled his gun and pointed it at Marcus. The audio caught the scream of a child in the background. Jamal. The video paused. Judge Judy looked out at the courtroom. The silence was thick. Officer Hicks, she said, your report claims you feared for your safety. But the footage shows a calm interaction until you introduced fear by escalating with a weapon. Care to explain that I was trained to assess threats and respond quickly? Hicks said flatly. Judge Judy shook her head. You were trained to assess reality, not manufacture fear. What we just saw was not a threat. That was a father trying to get his wallet. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. The defense attorney stood and asked to call the next witness. A teacher from the elementary school. Her name was Grace Howell. She was in her 50s, hair in a tight bun. Calm demeanor. S. Howell, were you present on the day of the incident? The defense asked. Yes, I was standing on the school steps, supervising dismissal. Did you witness the interaction between Officer Hicks and Mr. Williams? Yes, I saw it all. Can you describe what you saw? Wins was calm. What you used, Mr. Williams, was calm. Respectful. He was not yelling. He was just waiting for his son like the other parents. The officer became aggressive very quickly. It startled everyone. When he pulled out the gun, we had to usher several children back inside for safety. Judge Judy asked her own question. Miss Howell, In your professional opinion, was there anything threatening about Mr. Williams's behavior? Absolutely not, Your Honor. If anything, he was trying not to escalate. He looked frightened for his son more than himself, Judge. Judy leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. That will be all for now. As the courtroom paused for a recess, the whispers started. Even the reporters in the back row could not hide their surprise. The case was turning fast. The judge had not made a ruling yet, but her eyes spoke volumes. And Officer Hicks was starting to sweat. The truth was beginning to rise, and Judge Judy was just getting started. The courtroom buzzed low with energy as the bailiff called everyone back to order. The cameras in the back, assigned to record for public legal record, caught every detail. When Judge Judy re-entered, her posture was sharp as ever. She did not need a gavel to silence the room. Her presence alone commanded it. As she sat down and looked over her notes, Judge Judy spoke in a low but firm voice. Let us proceed. Marcus Williams sat with his defense attorney, a young but serious woman named Angela Reed. Angela had grown up watching Judge Judy and understood exactly what kind of courtroom she was stepping into. She was not here to play games. She was here to prove something. Your Honor, Angela, began, I request permission to replay a specific section of the body cam footage. I want to draw attention to the sound captured just before Officer Hicks pulled his weapon. Permission. Granted, said Judge Judy, without looking up. The courtroom dimmed again. This time, the audio was clearer. It was slowed down slightly. The screen showed Marcus reaching for his wallet with his left hand. His right hand remained visible on the car door. Then came the faintest voice in the background, Daddy. It was Jamal's voice. He had just seen his father being confronted. The voice cracked with fear. Then came the scream. A terrified scream that pierced the whole courtroom, even through the speakers. Then the weapon came out. Angela paused the video and turned to the judge. Your Honor, I submit this moment as evidence of trauma. This child did not just witness a police encounter. He watched his father be treated like a criminal. And for what reasonable parking and respectful behavior, Judge? Judy looked up from her bench slowly. Her eyes locked on Officer Hicks. Did you hear that voice? Yes, ma'am. That voice belongs to a child. That scream came because of your actions. Now I want to ask you something directly. Did you lie in your police report? Hicks shifted in his seat. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. He glanced down at the table. The courtroom waited. No, ma'am. Hicks, finally Judge Judy tapped her pen on the bench. Explain the sentence where you wrote that Mr. Williams was yelling aggressively and moving erratically. That was my perception. I believed he was being non-compliant. Your perception does not match video footage, nor the witness testimony. Testimony. Either you were wrong or you were dishonest. Which is it? Hicks did not respond. Angela stood again. Your Honor, I have another witness. One who has not been mentioned yet. A parent who stood on the sidewalk and recorded the encounter with her phone. Judge Judy raised an eyebrow. "Let us see it." The woman was called to the stand. Her name was Karen Tucker, a white woman in her 40s with 2 sons at the school. She looked nervous but determined. "Ms. Tucker, do you recognize the man sitting over there?" Angela asked, pointing at Marcus. "Yes." "That is the same man who was confronted by the officer that day." "Do you recognize the officer?" "Yes." "That is him. And do you have a video of the incident?" "Yes, I do." "I sent it to the defense team." Angela handed over the flash drive. The clerk played the phone recording. The angle was different. It showed more context. Parents walking by, kids holding backpacks, Marcus standing calmly. Then the arrival of Officer Hicks. There was no shouting, no aggression. The only person who raised their voice was Hicks. And then came the weapon, Karen. Tucker spoke softly. "I started recording because I felt something was wrong. The officer came in too hot. The man did not deserve to be treated like that. Especially not in front of his child." Judge Judy paused the video and leaned forward. "Ms. Tucker, thank you for your honesty. Your footage confirms what we have already seen. This was not a dangerous criminal. This was a father picking up his child. And what he got instead was a weapon in his face. And lies written about him." She turned again to Hicks. "You claimed in your report that Mr. Williams refused to show ID. Yet we now know he was reaching for it. You claimed he was shouting. But 3 recordings prove he was calm. You claimed he moved in a threatening way. But the video shows he moved carefully and slowly. So again I ask, did you lie in your police report?" This time the room was dead silent. Even the clocks seemed to pause. Hicks swallowed and said nothing. "Let the record show," Judge Judy said, "that the witness has failed to answer a direct question. That silence speaks volumes." The prosecutor stood up. "Your Honor, perhaps the officer was mistaken, but not malicious. Perhaps he genuinely believed he was under threat." Judge Judy cut him off mid-sentence. "Do not insult this court with maybe and perhaps. This is not a matter of perception. This is a matter of documented truth. Officers are not permitted to guess their way into conflict. The burden is on them to remain calm under pressure." Mr. Hicks not only escalated without cause, but then filed a false report that could have destroyed an innocent man's life. The camera zoomed in on Hicks. Sweat on his forehead, eyes flickering. He had once been seen as a respected officer. Now he looked like a man standing on the edge of a steep cliff. Judge Judy continued. "Mr. Williams was nearly arrested in front of his son. He was nearly taken into custody based on your word alone. If not for the footage and the witnesses, you might have succeeded. Do you understand how serious this is?" "Yes, ma'am," Hicks said finally. His voice was small. "This court does not tolerate dishonesty. This is not just about one officer. It is about trust. It is about power. And it is about accountability." Marcus sat quietly, his hands folded, his eyes watching every second. He was not just defending himself anymore. He was defending every parent who had been treated unfairly, every delivery driver, Every working black father who had ever been pulled over for existing. Angela stood again. Your Honor, the defense rests for today. But we request that the court issue a directive to the department to provide Officer Hicks's internal affairs record. We have reason to believe this is not the first incident of its kind. Judge Judy nodded. Request granted. She turned one last time to Hicks. Officer, you are ordered to appear again tomorrow. And if any part of your past disciplinary history contains use of force complaints or dishonesty charges, I will find them. I will expose them. And I will not allow you to wear a badge under false honor. The courtroom adjourned. Marcus stood and exhaled deeply. The weight was not gone, but for the first time in a long time he felt seen, heard. Believed outside the courtroom his son Jamal ran into his arms. Are you okay, Daddy? Yeah, baby Marcus said, hugging him tight. Daddy is gonna be okay. And inside the courtroom, justice had just begun this morning. When the courtroom reopened the next morning, tension floated thick in the air. Reporters sat in the back row scribbling notes and whispering quietly into recorders. The case had picked up local media attention overnight, and now half the city seemed to be watching. Not just because of what was said in court the day before, but because of who was on trial in spirit, even if not in name. Judge Judy entered with her usual poise. Her black robe billowed slightly behind her as she took her seat. She wasted no time. Bailiff, bring in the requested internal affairs. Reporter clerk brought forth a thick file. It was sealed in an evidence folder. Judge Judy opened it slowly, flipping through pages. Her face went unreadable, but her fingers paused on certain sections longer than others. Angela Reed, the defense attorney, rose to speak. Your Honor, we ask that the record include the dates and types of past complaints filed against Officer His office ordered. She read aloud on April 10th of last year that Officer Hicks was written for a police file body camera and following a power traffic of happening in which he was accused of yelling and apparently without young right not being apparent and following full code. From Bowen last year of children. The complaint was closed without follow-up. Judge Judy looked up at Hicks. Mr. Hicks, I see a pattern. You have a badge, and yet what I see is not protection and service. I see incidents buried in paperwork. Moments where you were shielded, not punished. Hicks looked down. His lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Let us be clear. You are not the only one on trial. This courtroom will also address the systems that failed to hold you accountable before this moment. Angela stood again, Your Honor. I would like to call another witness. Officer Daniel Myers, a fellow patrol officer who served on the same shift rotation as Officer Hicks. Judge Judy gave a single nod. Bring him in. Daniel Myers was tall and lanky with a gentle voice. He approached the stand with caution, as though stepping into deep water. Sworn in, he looked at both attorneys before settling his eyes on the judge. Officer Myers, you served alongside Hicks. For how long? About 2 years, ma'am. Have you ever witnessed misconduct by him? Myers hesitated, glancing at Hicks, who now sat stiff in his chair. Yes. Once. Maybe more. I did not report it. And that is on me. What did you witness? There was a stop last summer. A kid riding a bike near the construction site. Hicks said he looked suspicious, but the boy was just riding home. Hicks stopped him. Hand on the weapon, no smile, no words of kindness. Just control. And what happened? The boy started crying. He said he was going to his grandmother's house. Hicks let him go, but after making him stand for 10 minutes in the heat while running his ID. "Did you say anything to officer?" Hicks afterward, I told him it felt wrong. He said better safe than sorry. That was his response. Angela leaned forward. Why did you not report it? Because nobody listens. Because you get labeled a problem if you speak up. And because, truthfully, I was afraid. Afraid of rocking the boat. That is not an excuse. That is just the truth, Judge. Judy tapped her pen again. Officer Myers, your honesty is noted. And it is clear that silence does not equal peace. When good officers say nothing, bad ones grow bold. She turned to the clerk. Add Officer Myers' testimony to the official record. Now I will address this court directly. She stood up, which was rare. And when she stood, the entire room grew still. This is not a trial about a parking dispute. This is about power. It is about how that power is used. Mr. Williams did nothing wrong. Yet he was treated like a threat. Not because of his actions, but because of assumptions. And when those assumptions go unchecked, they rot the badge from the inside out. Angela spoke again, Your Honor. I would like to introduce Jamal Williams, a psychologist, to testify to the emotional impact of that day. Permission granted. Jotted. Evelyn Brooks entered the room. A soft-spoken woman with a calm voice and kind eyes. She sat down and faced the judge with a folder in her lap. Dr. Brooks, you have been working with Jamal for how long? 3 months now. Weekly sessions. Trauma counseling. What have you observed? Jamal has developed acute stress responses. He now flinches when he hears sirens. He asks questions like, what happens if Daddy gets taken away again? He draws pictures of police officers as monsters. This child is not simply scared. He is scarred, Judge. Judy listened intently. Do you believe this trauma came from the incident at the school? Without a doubt. It was a formative moment. A moment when a child saw his protector become the target. It shattered his sense of safety. Angela turned to the judge. Your Honor, this is the cost of falsehood. Not just broken trust, but broken minds. A child who must now be rebuilt because one man decided to write a lie instead of telling the truth, Judge. Judy looked down for a moment, then slowly closed the folder of records. In front of her, I have heard enough for today. This case is now larger than the courtroom. It represents every unseen moment where judgment overtakes justice. Officer Hicks, you are no longer simply accused of misconduct. You are facing moral failure. And I will not allow it to pass unchallenged. Court will reconvene tomorrow for final statements. Until then, I advise all parties to reflect. Because tomorrow we begin the closing chapter. The room remained still as Judge Judy exited. No one moved. Not Hicks. Not Marcus. Not Jamal, who sat beside his grandmother, quietly coloring a picture of a house with a blue sky. It was the only thing he could draw now that made for what him feel safe. And reckon him. Next morning the courtroom door crawled and let into a fuller crowd than ever before. Word had spread fast. Cameras waited outside, but inside the room remained sacred. No phones, no distractions, just truth on the table and eyes wide open. Judge Judy entered her bench with a focus that cut through the air like thunder. The bailiff called the court to order, and all rose to their feet. The judge gave a small wave of her hand, and everyone sat back down. We will now begin with final statements. Ms. Reed, you may proceed. Angela Reed rose from her seat like a storm gathering strength. She carried no papers, only a strong voice and unwavering eyes. Your Honor, this is not just about Officer Hicks. This is about a culture that let Officer Hicks believe he was above truth. That let him walk through our communities with a pen full of fiction and a badge too shiny to question. She turned toward the gallery, her voice rising, but not yelling. Marcus Williams did everything right. He was present for his son. He followed every law. Yet he was treated like a criminal because of one thing, his skin. Let us not sugarcoat it. That is what happened. She turned now to face Judge Judy directly. Your Honor, if we allow this man to walk free without judgment, without consequence, then we have failed. Not just Marcus, not just Jamal, but every person who has been stopped, watched, or accused, based not on action but assumption. She walked back to her table and sat down slowly. Thank you, Ms. Reed. Gay judge to the other side of the courtroom. Mr. Dalton, the defendant's attorney, stood with a rehearsed calm and a practiced sigh. Your Honor, this has become a public trial. Public trial. My client has been vilified in media and painted as a villain before this court has even ruled. Yes, Officer Hicks made a mistake in the report, but mistakes are not crimes, and emotion is not evidence. He looked across at Marcus and then briefly at Jamal before shifting his gaze to the judge again. This courtroom is not a protest rally. It is a place of law, and the law must remain blind. Not blind to color, but blind to chaos. Judge Judy raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She waited until he was seated again. Officer Hicks, you may address the court, if you wish. Hicks hesitated. The entire courtroom watched him as he slowly rose from his seat. His mouth opened, but his words came out slower than expected. I never meant to hurt anyone. I thought I was doing my job. That day at the school, I saw something I did not understand, and I reacted. I see now that I was wrong. He looked down, then back up toward Marcus. I was afraid. But fear does not excuse lying. I wrote something in that report that I cannot take back. And if that costs me everything, then maybe that is justice. Angela watched him with cold eyes, but did not interrupt. Marcus sat still, his hands folded tight in his lap. Jamal had fallen asleep against his grandmother's arm. The weight of days, too much for a child to carry awake. Judge Judy finally spoke. Let me remind this courtroom that what we do here matters. Not because of cameras or news stories, but because justice matters. Not performative justice. Not symbolic justice, but real justice. The kind that changes lives, not headlines. She tapped her finger once on the desk. I have reviewed all testimonies. I have studied the report. I have considered the silence of Officer Myers and the pain of young Jamal. I have listened. Now you will listen to me. She stood again, her voice, now carrying the full power of her presence. This court finds Officer Hicks guilty of falsifying a report, obstructing justice, and contributing to emotional harm against a minor. But more than that, this court finds a system that enabled him equally responsible. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, a long-held breath finally releasing from his chest. Judge Judy continued effective. Immediately, Officer Hicks will be stripped of his badge. He will be referred to the state board for decertification. And this court will recommend formal charges for perjury and obstruction of justice. There was no applause. Only the sound of people finally breathing again. To Marcus she turned with a different tone. Mr. Williams, I cannot erase what happened. But I can say this. You stood tall when the system tried to bend you. And you did not break. For that this court commends you. Marcus nodded, his voice cracking. Thank you, Your Honor. She looked to the sleeping Jamal. And to your son I say this. The world is not always fair, but sometimes the fight makes it better. And your father fought for you. She brought her gavel down, court adjourned. As people stood and prepared to leave, a woman from the gallery stepped forward. She wore a dark green jacket and held a notepad. A reporter from a national outlet. Mr. Williams, may I speak with you for a feature story? Marcus looked at her, then at Jamal, still asleep, and shook his head gently. Maybe another time. Right now my son needs peace. Angela placed a hand on his shoulder. You gave the court something bigger than a case, Marcus. You gave it a mirror, and it saw what needed to change. Outside the courthouse, people gathered. Some clapped, others hugged. No one shouted. It was not celebration. It was relief, sealed with quad cause evoking's the final word. Cool mards of the verdict sat quiet but powerful. The badge is gone, the lie is gone, the truth remains. The courtroom had emptied, but the truth still echoed that refused to quiet. Judge Judy handed down acquisition, but in Reignited stayed her longer than most gathering. Her note stayed behind longer than what and who sat on telling what and if you were sure and hammer and one on her. Let us go hear what she has to say. Inside chambers, the lighting was softer, the temperature warmer. Judge Judy sat at a small round table. No bench, no formality conversations. Sit, please, she said, nodding toward the seats across from her. Marcus and we're both still processing the gravity of what had just taken place. I asked to speak privately. Kodak is not the end. Is that is a judge? It is a back in something large and all. In something large and old. From narrative in something large and old. And cracks let in light. Angela leaned in, curious. What do you mean, Your Honor? Judge Judy tapped her fingers against a worn leather folder. This court case has gained attention far beyond this county. I have received inquiries from judicial ethics boards, police oversight commissions, and even the state attorney general. Marcus raised his eyebrows. That fast? She nodded. When truth cuts deep, it bleeds into every system connected to it. What happened to you, Marcus, is not isolated. You are just the one who was strong enough to bring it into the light. Angela tilted her head. So what happens now? I have recommended that Officer Hicks not only be decertified, but also face criminal charges. I also pushed for a full investigation into Officer Myers and the administrators at Jamal's school. Marcus leaned back stunned. The school too? Yes, said Judge Judy firmly. They failed your son by accepting the lie without question. That kind of cowardice can no longer be tolerated. Angela folded her arms and asked, "What can we do to help this move forward?" The judge looked directly at Marcus. "I need you to testify at a special hearing before the State Commission. It is not mandatory, but your words carry weight now." Marcus paused. His hands were still. His eyes met Angela's. "And what about Jamal? Bring him." Let them see the face of the child this system tried to crush. That truth is more powerful than any document. Marcus nodded slowly. "I will do it." Judge Judy smiled faintly. "Good. Then, maybe we can start turning these cracks into something wider." Back in the courtroom hallways, reporters still lingered, waiting for any additional statements. Angela and Marcus slipped out a side exit, avoiding attention. Once outside, Marcus knelt and gently woke Jamal, who blinked groggily and looked around. "Are we done, Daddy?" Marcus nodded. "We are done here, son. But we are just getting started with making things better." And looked up. "Is that Lady Judge Gano?" And Angela smiled. "I think she just might." The next day, news broke across television and lines. Red judge strips cop of badge after courtroom bombshell, and black father wins historic justice ruling. The clips of the court proceedings circulate. Feedings circulating fast. But none struck deeper than a still photo of Marcos Hamal outside the courtroom door, framed by a beam of morning light. That photo would later be used in amidst campaigns across the country. Meanwhile, in the office of a senior official sat reviewing. Brooks said quietly, "This is a nightmare." First of all, up in the morning, their lives and them in the use of nightmare. Hicks is already being asked to surrender his service weapon. The department's reputation is collapsing. His deputy leaned back. "We covered for guys like him for too long." The system protected its own until someone strong enough broke through. Brooks closed the folder. "Marcus Williams just made us all answer for it." And Judge Judy forced the gavel down in a way Nungus found himself, fielding phone calls from civil rights groups, school boards, and legal clinics. Angela helped him manage the flood of support. "We will set up a farm, can use your kid if no honest." Marcus agreed, but only if Jamal names agreed. But only if Jamal names names. States protected I have done help one around in Ed more than the World Bank Chinese. I've been with blank eyes, news about school board will belong in first sample born. So from a moment that image was gone. His future uncertain. And the echo of Judge Judy's ruling repeated in his head. "You chose fiction over fact. And now you face hands. Shaking, "I thought I was protecting the world," he whispered. "But the world needed protection from me." In a quiet room of a school who had called in the police, the principal, "We were failing. You failed the hand and had," he said aloud. "We failed that boy." The administrator across from him nodded. Training is not enough. Fustim the whining boy faced the me, who called in the police not enough. We need people who see black children as children, not threats. Back at the courthouse, Judge Judy prepared her notes for the upcoming commission testimony. Her assistant asked, "Do you think this will change anything?" She looked up from her notes. "It already has. The morning after the ruling." From morning was to the ruling. The air felt charged. Every headline, every social media post was now focused on the courtroom drama. Marcus Williams had become a symbol not just for justice, but for hope in a system that so often failed black families. Inside the Williams household, Marcus sat with his feet propped up on a coffee table. Jamal, still riding the wave of victory, was coloring quietly in the corner. Angela was on the phone with yet another reporter, trying to manage the media storm. It was all happening so fast. Marcus rubbed his forehead, trying to soak it all in. His life had changed forever, but so had his perspective. He had fought for his son, but now the fight was much bigger than just their family. Angela entered the living room and sat down beside him, her voice soft. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't even know anymore," Marcus admitted. "Every time I turn on the news, it's like a new angle on the story. But I can't let this go. Not now. Not after everything we've been through." Angela nodded, understanding the weight of it all. The phone rang again, and she glanced at the caller ID. This time, it was a prominent civil rights organization. "Take it," she said. "I'll keep Jamal entertained." Marcus picked up the phone, listening closely to the voice on the other end. It was the head of a national organization that focused on police reform. "Mr. Williams," the voice said, "we've been watching the trial. Your courage, your strength, your willingness to stand up. This is exactly what we need to keep pushing for reform in police departments all across the country." Marcus sat up straighter, his attention fully on the conversation. "What do you mean?" "We want you to be part of a larger campaign," the voice continued. "We believe your case could be the catalyst for a nationwide movement. If you're willing, we can provide support and resources to help you take the fight beyond the courtroom. It's time for more officers to be held accountable for their actions, and your story could help spark that change." Marcus paused. It wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't even just about his son. This was something much bigger. "I'm in," Marcus said. "But it has to be about real change, not just another hashtag." The voice on the other end of the phone sounded relieved. "That's exactly what we want, Mr. Williams. Real change." As Marcus hung up, his thoughts raced. He looked over at Angela, who was now watching him closely. "What happened?" she asked. "I just agreed to something big," Marcus replied. "We're going to make sure this doesn't end with justice." Angela smiled. "That's what I've always loved about you. You never stop fighting." Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, the effects of Judge Judy's ruling were being felt on a much broader scale. Officers who had once felt untouchable were now looking over their shoulders. Departments that had long turned a blind eye to misconduct were beginning to take notice. The entire system that had allowed corrupt practices to thrive was now under a magnifying glass. In the police commissioner's office, Commissioner Brooks sat at his desk, going over reports. The phone on his desk buzzed, and he picked it up. "Brooks," the voice on the other end said, "have you seen the news?" "Of course," he replied, "but I've got a situation here. Hicks is making waves, and I'm dealing with the fallout." The voice on the other end paused. "The real issue isn't Hicks, Brooks. It's everything that led up to his actions. We've had these problems for years. But now, with Marcus Williams and Judge Judy bringing it all to the surface, we can't hide from it any longer." Brooks sighed. "I know. But what do we do?" "We're already dealing with an investigation into Hicks. And now there's pressure from the state Attorney General's office, the ethics boards, even civil rights groups." "That's just the beginning," the voice said grimly. "If we don't take responsibility for this, we'll lose everything. This is bigger than just one officer. This is about a culture of abuse that we've allowed to exist for far too long." Brooks clenched his jaw. "You're right," he said quietly. "It's time to make some serious changes." Back at the Williams home, Marcus was pacing, running his hands through his hair. Angela stood in the doorway, watching him. "What's going on in that head of yours?" she asked. Marcus stopped, looking at her. "I don't know if I can do this. I mean, we're talking about a national movement now. A movement that could change the whole system. It's a lot." Angela walked up to him and placed her hands on his shoulders. "You've been carrying the weight of this for a long time, Marcus. But you don't have to carry it alone anymore. We've got the support we need now. And Jamal, he needs to see that his dad didn't just fight for him. He fought for everyone who looks like him." Marcus took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "You're right," he said. "I'm not doing this for the headlines. I'm doing it for the future. For Jamal. For every black kid who deserves to grow up without fear." Angela smiled, proud of him. "Then let's make sure we do it right. Let's make sure the world hears our story." Later that week, Marcus attended his first meeting with the National Civil Rights Organization. They discussed how to frame his case as a cornerstone for broader police reform. The goal was clear: change the system, so that incidents like the one he had endured would no longer be swept under the rug. Meanwhile, the police department was facing intense scrutiny from all sides. The investigations into Officer Hicks and Officer Myers were just the beginning. The State Attorney General's office had opened an inquiry into the department's practices, and the media was now investigating not just the officers involved, but the broader culture of policing that had allowed such actions to occur. The pressure was mounting, and the department was on the defensive. But no one could deny that things were changing. The old guard was being challenged, and the system was finally being held accountable. As Marcus and Angela continued to work on their campaign for justice, they knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But they also knew the light they had brought to this issue could change the future for countless others. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a sense of peace. They had won in the courtroom, but their fight was far from over. The real work was just beginning. The days following Marcus's decision to step into the national spotlight felt like a whirlwind. Calls, emails, and messages flooded in from all directions. What had started as a courtroom battle for justice had now become the center of a national conversation about police accountability, racial injustice, and the need for reform in the criminal justice system. Marcus had spent years navigating the challenges of being a black father, but now, as the face of something much larger, he found himself juggling the emotional weight of this newfound responsibility. One morning, as Marcus and Angela sat in their kitchen, the phone rang again. Marcus, now used to the constant interruptions, answered it with a weary sigh. But when he heard the voice on the other end, something in his demeanor shifted. "Mr. Williams," the voice said, "this is Sarah Jefferson from the National Justice Reform Network. We've been watching your case closely. We want to meet with you and discuss how we can leverage this moment to push for real policy changes." Marcus sat up straighter, trying to focus on the conversation. "I'm listening," he said. "We believe your case has the potential to ignite a nationwide movement. We have a network of activists, legal experts, and policymakers who are ready to support this cause. But we need you to be the public face of this movement. Marcus, your story resonates with so many people, and we want to make sure it doesn't stop here." Angela looked at Marcus, sensing the shift in his energy. She knew this was a turning point. "What exactly do you need from me?" Marcus asked, already bracing for the demands. "We need you to start speaking at rallies, participating in interviews, and using your platform to demand change. Your voice will carry the weight of thousands of people who have been victims of police misconduct, and we want to help amplify that voice." Marcus glanced at Angela, who nodded her approval. "Let's do it," he said. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the future." As Marcus and Angela finalized their commitment to the National Justice Reform Network, the impact of their actions rippled across the country. The media coverage intensified, and public opinion began to shift. For the first time in a long time, people were talking openly about the systemic issues that had allowed police misconduct to continue unchecked. But not everyone was on board with the growing movement. In the weeks following Judge Judy's ruling, there was pushback from those who had long defended the status quo. The police unions, who had once been a powerful force in protecting officers like Hicks, began to rally against the growing calls for reform. They painted Marcus as a symbol of division and suggested that his case was an isolated incident, not representative of the larger issue at hand. In the midst of this, An unlikely ally emerged. A former police officer named Derek Thompson reached out to Marcus. Derek had spent 15 years on the force before leaving due to what he called a toxic and corrupt culture within the department. "I've seen firsthand how the system protects its own," Derek said during their first phone call. "I know how easy it is to look the other way when officers make mistakes. But after everything I've seen, I can't stay silent anymore." Marcus, who had been hesitant to trust anyone from the police force, listened carefully. "Why reach out to me?" Marcus asked. "Why now?" "Because I've been watching this whole thing unfold," Derek replied. "And I can't sit back and watch the department continue to protect people like Hicks. I want to help. I want to use my experience to expose the corruption from the inside." Marcus was skeptical, but he knew that the fight ahead would require allies from all corners. If Derek was sincere, his knowledge could be invaluable. "All right, let's meet," Marcus said. "But understand this. If you're in for the long haul." Derek agreed, and over the next several weeks, the two men began working together to build a coalition of former officers, legal experts, and activists who were all committed to demanding change. They organized rallies, held press conferences, and pushed for accountability within police departments across the country. One of their first major victories came when a local police department agreed to implement new training protocols focused on de-escalation tactics and anti-racism education. It wasn't the sweeping change that many had hoped for, but it was a start. A tangible victory that showed the power of public pressure. Marcus's role in these efforts grew. He spoke at rallies and joined panel discussions with activists, lawyers, and community leaders. His face became synonymous with the movement for police reform, and he was approached by journalists and media outlets from across the globe. The pressure on the police departments was mounting, and they knew that they couldn't hide from it any longer. Meanwhile, Judge Judy, who had been following the developments closely, sent Marcus a message of encouragement. "I'm proud of you," she wrote. "You've taken this from a courtroom victory to a national movement. Keep fighting. Keep speaking the truth." Her words reinforced Marcus's determination. He knew that there was still much work to be done, but he also knew that they were on the right path. The fight for justice wasn't just about one officer or one case. It was about dismantling a system that had allowed these abuses to go on unchecked for far too long. As the weeks passed, the pressure on Officer Hicks grew. He was still under investigation for his role in the false report against Jamal, and the public outcry was only getting louder. His reputation within the department had been tarnished, and his future as a police officer seemed increasingly uncertain. Despite this, Hicks remained defiant. He refused to take responsibility for his actions, insisting that he had done nothing wrong. His attorneys worked tirelessly to delay the investigation, hoping that the public outrage would die down. But Marcus, Angela, and their growing coalition of supporters made sure that didn't happen. In the midst of the chaos, Marcus received a phone call that would change everything. It was from the State Attorney General's office. "Mr. Williams," the voice on the other end said, "we've been reviewing the evidence in Officer Hicks's case. We've made our decision." Marcus's heart raced. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. Hicks has been charged with falsifying reports, abuse of power, and violating Jamal's civil rights. The voice continued. "We are moving forward with a formal case against him, and we intend to seek criminal charges." Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Finally, it was happening. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for doing the right thing." The day Marcus had been waiting for had finally arrived. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters from across the nation had gathered, their cameras flashing as they set up their equipment. Lawyers, witnesses, and activists filled the seats. The stage was set for a battle that would determine not only Officer Hicks's fate, but also the future of police accountability in America. As Marcus and Angela entered the courtroom, their hearts raced. This wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was the culmination of months of struggle, a moment when justice would either prevail or fail. Marcus had always known that the odds were stacked against him, but today, the stakes were higher than ever. Judge Judy entered the courtroom with her usual no-nonsense demeanor. She sat down at her bench, surveying the room with an air of authority that instantly commanded respect. Without a word, she signaled for the trial to begin. The prosecutor, a woman named Karen Bellamy, stood up first. She was an experienced attorney known for her no-holds-barred approach to the law. She glanced briefly at Marcus and Angela before turning her focus to the defendant. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," she began, "today we are here to seek justice for Marcus Williams and his son Jamal. Officer Hicks falsified reports, abused his power, and violated the civil rights of an innocent black father. His actions were not only unethical, they were criminal." Karen's words were sharp, calculated, and filled with conviction. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, talking to witnesses, and ensuring that everything was in place to hold Hicks accountable. Officer Hicks's attorney, a man named Edward Thompson, stood up next. He adjusted his glasses before addressing the court. "Your Honor," he said, "there is no evidence that Officer Hicks acted with malice. He was simply following procedure, as he was trained to do. The accusations against him are exaggerated and based on misunderstandings." Edward's defense was weak, but he was a seasoned lawyer who knew how to create doubt. He immediately began to poke holes in the prosecution's case, focusing on minor inconsistencies in the testimonies and attempting to paint Hicks as a well-meaning officer who had made an honest mistake. But Judge Judy wasn't having it. "Mr. Thompson," she interjected, "your argument is not only unconvincing, it's insulting. Officer Hicks made a deliberate decision to lie in his report and target an innocent man. There is no mistake here. This is about a violation of rights. Let's stay focused on the facts. Edward hesitated, but then quickly shifted gears. He pointed to the body camera footage of the incident, hoping to use it as a key piece of evidence in Hicks's favor. "If you look at this footage," he said, "you'll see that Officer Hicks was calm, collected, and only acting in response to what he perceived as a potential threat. He did what any reasonable officer would have done in that situation." But the footage, as Karen had already pointed out, told a different story. It showed a black father, Marcus, being treated with unnecessary aggression and hostility, all based on a false assumption. There was no threat, no provocation, only a man trying to make his way home to his son. Judge Judy leaned forward. Her eyes locked onto the screen as the video played. She didn't flinch, didn't give an inch. Her gaze was piercing, and it was clear that she wasn't swayed by the defense's argument. After the footage ended, she turned to Officer Hicks. "Officer Hicks," she began, "I've seen enough. You may be good at what you do in terms of enforcement, but today, you're on trial for what you did to this man. You didn't just make a mistake. You abused your power. And now, it's time to face the consequences." Hicks shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable under the judge's intense scrutiny. He had been confident before, but now the reality of the situation was sinking in. He had no backup, no way to explain away the facts that had already been laid out. His defense was crumbling, and the pressure was building. The trial continued throughout the day, with each side presenting their arguments. Marcus was called to testify, and as he took the stand, his mind raced. He had relived this moment 1,000 times, but now it was real. The world was watching, and he had to tell his story, the truth. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus did so with calm resolve. "I'm here today because I want justice," Marcus began. "I'm here because no one should have to go through what I went through. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to get home to my son." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made the entire room fall silent. "I've spent my whole life trying to do things the right way," Marcus continued. "And when I was stopped by Officer Hicks, it wasn't because of anything I did. It was because of who I am. I was treated like a criminal because of the color of my skin. That's not justice. That's a system that needs to change." Tears welled up in Angela's eyes as she listened to her husband's testimony. She knew how hard it had been for him to relive that moment. But she also knew that his words had the power to change everything. When Marcus finished, the room remained still. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. Judge Judy's eyes never left him. "You've shown incredible strength, Mr. Williams," Judge Judy said. "And I believe that your testimony, along with the evidence we've seen, will help this court reach the right decision. But we're not done yet." We still have more to hear. The defense tried once more to poke holes in Marcus's story, but Judge Judy wasn't having it. She swiftly shot down every attempt, pointing out contradictions and flaws in their reasoning. Finally, as the day came to a close, Judge Judy addressed the court. "We will reconvene tomorrow for closing statements," she announced. "But let it be clear, this is not just about one officer's actions. This is about a system that has allowed abuse and misconduct to persist for far too long. The truth has been laid bare, and now we must decide what happens next." The courtroom was filled with tension, but Marcus felt a sense of calm. For the first time in this entire process, he felt like they were finally on the verge of real change. As the court adjourned for the day, Marcus turned to Angela, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is it," he said. "We're almost there." The courtroom was tense as the final day of the trial began. The excitement in the air was palpable, and the weight of the case seemed to hang over everyone present. All eyes were on Judge Judy, who had maintained an unwavering sense of authority and balance throughout the proceedings. Today would be the day that everything came to a head. The day when the fate of Officer Hicks would be sealed, and Marcus and his family would see if their fight for justice had been in vain. Marcus, his stomach twisting in knots, sat next to Angela, who offered him a reassuring smile. It had been a long journey, but they had made it this far. No matter what the outcome was, they knew they had given everything they had. They had made their voices heard, and they had pushed for change in a system that had too often turned a blind eye to injustice. The room was filled with anticipation as the defense attorney, Edward Thompson, stood up for the closing arguments. He adjusted his tie and cleared his throat, trying to project an air of confidence. "Your Honor," he began, "today we are not talking about a case of racial discrimination. What we are dealing with here is a situation where an officer was doing his job. Officer Hicks was simply responding to what he perceived as suspicious behavior, and he acted in accordance with his training. This is not about malice or abuse. It is about a misunderstanding that escalated. There is no evidence to suggest that Officer Hicks intentionally lied or sought to harm the plaintiff in any way." His voice echoed in the quiet courtroom, and he paused to look around the room as if he were waiting for some sort of reaction. But the room remained still, and Marcus could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on the defense attorney. There was no escaping the truth now. Edward continued with his argument, trying to downplay the significance of Hicks's actions, but his words lacked conviction. The evidence against Hicks was clear, too clear to be ignored. The body camera footage, the falsified reports, and the eyewitness testimonies all painted a picture of a man who had misused his authority to target an innocent black father. Judge Judy sat silently, listening intently. She had been quiet throughout the defense's closing statement, but Marcus could feel her eyes on him. It was almost as if she were weighing the entire case in her mind, considering every detail, every piece of evidence. He knew that her reputation for fairness was unmatched, and he trusted that she would do what was right. When Edward finished, it was Karen Bellamy's turn to deliver her closing argument. She rose to her feet and looked at Marcus, her voice calm but resolute. "Your Honor," she began, "this case is not just about one officer's actions. It is about the systemic abuse of power that far too many people in this country have suffered from. Marcus Williams did not deserve to be treated the way he was. He did not deserve to be racially profiled, harassed, and falsely accused. And his son, Jamal, should never have been forced to witness the pain and humiliation that his father endured." She paused for a moment, allowing her words to settle into the room. Marcus's chest tightened as the emotions of the past few weeks hit him all over again. This was more than just his story. It was the story of so many people who had been wronged by a system that had failed them. The prosecutor continued, her voice rising with conviction. "Officer Hicks's actions were not the actions of a well-meaning officer. They were the actions of someone who abused his power to unfairly target a man based on his race, and he lied to cover up those actions. He falsified his report, and he tried to deflect blame onto an innocent man. That is a crime, and it is a crime that cannot go unpunished." Karen's words resonated deeply with the people in the courtroom. Marcus could see the look of approval on Angela's face as she nodded along. It was clear that Karen had done everything she could to make the case for justice. Finally, Judge Judy spoke. Her voice was firm, and the room fell silent as she prepared to make her ruling. "I have listened carefully to both sides," she began. "I have seen the evidence, heard the testimonies, and I have taken into account the broader implications of this case. Officer Hicks's actions were reprehensible. He lied, he abused his power, and he racially profiled a man who had done nothing wrong. His actions not only violated Marcus Williams's civil rights, they violated the trust that every citizen places in law enforcement." She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the room. The tension was thick. This court cannot stand by and allow this kind of behavior to go unchecked. Judge Judy continued, "We have a duty to ensure that justice is served, and that duty does not end when an officer is involved. In fact, it is even more crucial that we hold those in power accountable." The courtroom held its breath as Judge Judy delivered the verdict that would change everything. "Officer Hicks, this court finds you guilty of falsifying reports, abuse of power, and violating Marcus Williams's civil rights. You have betrayed the very principles of justice and fairness that you swore to uphold." There was a moment of stunned silence before the whispers began. Marcus could feel his heart pounding in his chest, and Angela squeezed his hand tightly. This was it. The moment they had fought for. Judge Judy continued, "Your actions have consequences, Officer Hicks. You will be stripped of your badge and you will face criminal charges. Your career as a police officer is over, and you will be held accountable for the damage you have caused." The gavel came down, and the courtroom erupted into applause. Marcus stood up slowly, feeling a mix of relief, anger, and exhaustion. He had done it. They had done it. They had held the system accountable. But even as the applause continued, Marcus couldn't help but think about the future. This was just one victory. The fight for justice was far from over. But today, in this courtroom, they had sent a powerful message: no one, not even those in power, was above the law. The days following the trial were a blur for Marcus and his family. The media coverage was intense, and every major news outlet seemed to pick up the story of Officer Hicks's conviction. The narrative had shifted from a simple case of police misconduct to a broader conversation about accountability in law enforcement. The trial had not only exposed the flaws in Hicks's actions, but had also ignited a national dialogue about racial profiling, abuse of power, and the systemic injustices that had plagued communities of color for generations. Marcus felt the weight of it all. The pressure, the responsibility. He knew that this was only the beginning. While the court had delivered a decisive blow to Officer Hicks, the fight for justice wasn't over. This trial had only been one chapter in a much larger book. He had won in the courtroom, but the real work would take place in the streets, in the communities, and in the halls of legislation. Angela, who had been by his side through every step of the process, was equally aware of the long road ahead. As the couple sat together in their living room, surrounded by the quiet comfort of their home, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of unfinished business. "We've done something important," Angela said softly, her hand resting on his. "But there's so much more to be done." Marcus nodded, his gaze distant. He knew that the victory in court was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. The truth was that for every Officer Hicks, there were countless others who had escaped justice, whose victims had never had the courage or the resources to speak out. Marcus wanted to be a part of the movement that changed that ensured that no one else would have to go through what he had endured. In the days that followed, the phone calls and messages flooded in. Civil rights organizations, community leaders, and even politicians reached out to offer their support and congratulations. Some of them offered to help amplify Marcus's story, to give him a platform to speak out against police brutality and the abuse of power that was so prevalent in the system. But Marcus didn't want the attention. He wasn't in this for fame or recognition. He was in it because of Jamal, because of every other black father who had been unjustly targeted by the system. He wanted to use this moment to spark real change, to make sure that the victory in the courtroom wasn't just a one-time event, but the beginning of a movement. The media frenzy continued to swirl around the trial, but Marcus kept his focus. He knew that this moment had given him a unique opportunity to push for reforms in law enforcement, but he was cautious not to jump into the spotlight too quickly. He wanted to make sure that, when he spoke, his words would be measured, that his actions would be thoughtful and impactful. One of the first steps Marcus took was to meet with leaders from several advocacy organizations focused on police reform. He wanted to understand the real issues at play, to learn from those who had been fighting this battle for much longer than he had. He listened to their experiences, their struggles, and their successes, and he began to form a plan for how he could contribute to the cause. But as he worked with these groups, Marcus quickly realized that the fight for justice went beyond just holding individual officers accountable. It was about changing the entire system, from the way officers were trained to how they interacted with communities of color, to the way they were held accountable when things went wrong. Marcus's story began to gain traction, and before long, he was invited to speak at rallies and town hall meetings across the country. He spoke about the need for comprehensive police reform, about the importance of community involvement in shaping law enforcement practices, and about the painful reality that too many black men and women had been unjustly targeted by police officers who saw them as threats rather than citizens. The response to his speeches was overwhelming. People from all walks of life, black and white, young and old, from urban centers to small towns, came forward to show their support. They wanted to be a part of the change that Marcus was pushing for. They wanted to ensure that what happened to him and his family would never happen to anyone else. But there was also backlash. There were those who saw Marcus's story as a threat, who believed that holding police officers accountable was an attack on law enforcement as a whole. They tried to discredit him, to paint him as a troublemaker or a symbol of division. But Marcus was undeterred. He had faced adversity before, and he knew that true change never came without resistance. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus continued to push forward. He became involved in local initiatives aimed at improving police, community relations, working with law enforcement agencies to implement better training and more effective oversight. He also advocated for policies that would hold officers accountable for misconduct, demanding that transparency and fairness become the standard rather than the exception. Meanwhile, Officer Hicks's life had taken a dramatic turn. The day after the verdict, he had been stripped of his badge and placed on administrative leave. The backlash against him had been swift and unforgiving. His fellow officers distanced themselves from him, and many of his supporters in the community turned their backs. Hicks's career was over, and he would soon face criminal charges for his actions during the incident with Marcus. But the damage done to Marcus's life and to his community was far from over. Even though Hicks had been held accountable, the system that allowed him to abuse his power was still intact. Marcus knew that the real work was just beginning. One of the most significant steps in Marcus's journey came when he was approached by an organization dedicated to pushing for changes in police policy at the national level. They wanted Marcus to be a part of a national campaign to reform police practices, to fight for policies that would prevent incidents like the one he had endured from happening in the future. Marcus hesitated at first. He wasn't sure if he was ready to take on such a monumental task. But then he thought about Jamal. He thought about all the other children who would grow up in a world where racial profiling and police brutality still existed. And he knew, in that moment, that this was his calling. He couldn't just sit back and let things stay the way they were. He agreed to join the campaign, and over the next few months, he traveled the country, speaking to lawmakers, community leaders, and everyday citizens about the need for change. He used his own experience as a powerful example of why the system needed to change. The impact of his efforts was felt across the nation. Several states passed new laws that strengthened accountability, measures for law enforcement agencies, and police departments began implementing new training programs focused on de-escalation and bias reduction. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And for Marcus, that was enough. He had taken the pain and injustice that had been done to him and turned it into something powerful, something that would continue to resonate long after the trial had ended. He had fought for justice, and he had made a difference. As Marcus's name became more synonymous with the fight for justice, the weight of his newfound platform grew heavier. His role in the movement for police reform had taken on national significance, and every day felt like a test of his resolve. As he continued his advocacy, he found himself facing new challenges, ones that came not only from the systems he sought to reform, but also from within his own community. Marcus had become a symbol of hope, but that symbol came with a price. The media coverage of his efforts was unrelenting. Newspapers, television shows, and social media platforms all echoed his name as the face of police reform. Interviews, town hall meetings, and public appearances became regular fixtures of his life. At first, Marcus was energized by the response, encouraged by the passion of the people who rallied behind him. But as the months wore on, he found himself exhausted, drained by the constant demand for his time and energy. Angela noticed the toll it was taking on him. She had always been his rock, his unwavering support, but even she could see that the stress was starting to wear him down. There were moments when Marcus would retreat into himself, caught in the weight of the responsibility he had taken on. There were times when he would wake up in the middle of the night, his mind racing with thoughts of the countless people who had been affected by police brutality, wondering if the fight they had started would ever truly bring about lasting change. Despite the fatigue, Marcus continued to push forward. He knew that the stakes were too high to back down now. He had been given a voice, and he was determined to use it to make a difference. One of the most significant moments in his journey came when he was invited to testify before Congress. It was a historic occasion, one that Marcus had never imagined when he first found himself at the center of the trial. He would be standing before lawmakers, giving them a first-hand account of the events that had transpired and urging them to take action. The pressure was immense, but Marcus felt a sense of duty he couldn't ignore. This was his moment to speak not just for himself, but for every person who had suffered because of a broken system. The night before his testimony, Marcus sat alone in his hotel room, going over his notes. His thoughts wandered to Jamal, who had grown older over the past few months. He thought about how his son had seen him endure the trial, the media circus, and the constant barrage of public scrutiny. Jamal had witnessed firsthand the toll that this fight had taken on their family. Yet he had also seen the strength that Marcus had found in the face of adversity. Marcus couldn't help but wonder what kind of world Jamal would grow up in. Would it be a world where people of color were treated fairly by law enforcement? Or would he have to fight the same battles his father had fought? The next morning, Marcus stood before the congressional committee. He was nervous, but he had prepared for this moment. He was no longer just a victim of police brutality. He was a voice for the countless others who had been silenced. He took a deep breath, looked around the room, and began to speak. "This isn't just about me," Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is about every black person who has been stopped, harassed, or assaulted by police because of the color of their skin. This is about every parent who has had to explain to their child why they need to be careful when they interact with law enforcement. This is about the system that has failed us time and time again, and it's about time we change that system." His words resonated in the room, and the committee members listened intently. Marcus spoke about his personal experience, about the pain of being falsely accused, and the humiliation of having his life turned upside down by an officer who had abused his power. He spoke about the emotional toll it had taken on his family, and about the lessons he hoped to teach Jamal in the future. The testimony was powerful. It was raw, honest, and unflinching. Marcus didn't hold back, and the response was overwhelming. Afterward, several members of Congress approached him, expressing their support for the reforms he was advocating for. Some even promised to introduce legislation aimed at addressing the issues of police accountability that Marcus had highlighted. But not everyone was on board with his message. There were those who disagreed with Marcus's call for reform. Those who believed that he was making a mountain out of a molehill. They accused him of inflating his experience, of playing the race card, and of undermining the legitimacy of law enforcement. These critics tried to paint Marcus as a troublemaker, someone who was more interested in stirring up division than in seeking true justice. Marcus knew that this was to be expected. He had seen the same resistance before, during the trial, and he knew it would continue as he pushed for change. But he also knew that the fight for justice was never easy. The people who had come before him, those who had fought for civil rights, for equality, for fairness, had faced far worse opposition. If they could endure the struggles of their time, so could he. As the weeks passed, Marcus's efforts began to gain even more traction. Several major police departments across the country began to implement reforms based on the recommendations he had made. There were new policies on de-escalation tactics, on the use of force, and on increasing diversity within police ranks. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. But Marcus remained cautious. He knew that the fight for justice was ongoing, and he understood that real change would take time. While the trial had brought him some measure of justice, the larger systemic issues would not be solved with a single victory. He couldn't afford to rest on his laurels. He had to keep pushing forward, keep raising his voice, and keep fighting for the changes that were necessary. Meanwhile, Officer Hicks's life had taken a dark turn. The charges against him were severe, and the pressure on him to plead guilty was mounting. His reputation had been destroyed, and his future was uncertain. But Marcus didn't take satisfaction in Hicks's downfall. He had always believed that true justice was not about vengeance. It was about accountability, healing, and change. One day, Marcus received a call from Jamal's school. It was a routine check-in, but there was something different about this conversation. The school had noticed that Jamal had been quieter lately, more withdrawn. Marcus was immediately concerned. He had seen how his son had been affected by the events of the trial, but he hadn't realized the full extent of the impact. Jamal, who had always been so strong and resilient, was struggling with the weight of everything that had happened. This was the moment that truly solidified Marcus's understanding of the long-term effects of his fight for justice. It wasn't just about the legal battles or the headlines. It was about his family, about the future he was shaping for Jamal. He knew that his journey had to be about healing, not just for himself, but for his son as well. The weight of the battle for justice had left its mark on Marcus, but it had also ignited a fire within him that he couldn't ignore. As time passed, he realized that his role in this fight was bigger than he had ever imagined. He was no longer just a man seeking justice for himself and his family. He had become a symbol of change, a beacon for those who had been silenced for too long. The legacy he was building was one of transformation, not just in law enforcement, but in society as a whole. One evening, Marcus sat in his living room with Angela, reflecting on everything that had happened. The months since the trial had been a whirlwind, but now that things had begun to calm down, he found himself at a crossroads. The reform efforts were gaining traction, but the fight for justice was far from over. He had spent so much time focused on the immediate battles, facing down the officers who had wronged him, testifying before Congress, and dealing with the media frenzy, that he hadn't fully considered the long-term impact of his actions. Angela, ever the pragmatist, knew that the path forward wasn't going to be easy. She had seen the toll that the fight for justice had taken on Marcus, both physically and emotionally. But she also saw the man he had become. A man who had taken the worst moment of his life and turned it into a movement. He had transformed from a victim of police brutality into a leader for systemic change. It was in that quiet moment of reflection that Marcus understood what he needed to do next. His fight couldn't just be about the immediate victories or even the reforms that were already in motion. It had to be about building something that would outlast him, something that would continue to inspire future generations to stand up for justice. He had to ensure that the lessons learned from his own struggles were passed on to others, who would carry the torch forward. The idea of starting a foundation dedicated to criminal justice reform began to take shape in Marcus's mind. He knew that the work couldn't stop with him. His experiences had given him a unique perspective on the flaws in the system, and he could use that knowledge to help others who were caught in the same cycle of injustice. The foundation would provide support for victims of police brutality, advocate for policy changes, and create educational programs that would equip young people with the tools to fight for change in their own communities. But creating a foundation was no small task. Marcus knew that it would require resources, time, and effort beyond anything he had ever done before. It would mean mobilizing the support of like-minded individuals and organizations, navigating the complexities of non-profit management, and fighting against those who sought to maintain the status quo. It was a daunting prospect, but Marcus was no stranger to adversity. He had faced down the police, the courts, and the media, and now he was ready to take on this new challenge. As he began to lay the groundwork for the foundation, Marcus reached out to his network of allies, activists, lawmakers, community leaders, and even some of the police officers who had been involved in the reforms. He knew that true change would require collaboration, and he was determined to build a coalition that could push the conversation about criminal justice forward. Together, they would create a roadmap for reform that went beyond the surface, leveled changes, and tackled the deeper issues of systemic racism, police accountability, and the criminal justice system's treatment of marginalized communities. In the months that followed, Marcus worked tirelessly to turn his vision into reality. The foundation was officially established, and its mission was clear: to advocate for comprehensive criminal justice reform, support those who had been impacted by police violence, and educate the public about the need for lasting change. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People from all walks of life, from activists to law enforcement officers, lent their support to the cause, and soon the foundation began to make a tangible impact in communities across the country. Meanwhile, Officer Hicks faced the consequences of his actions. His lies in court had not only cost him his badge, but had also led to a wave of public outrage. The trial had set a precedent, showing that no one, no matter their position, was above the law. Hicks's downfall was a stark reminder that accountability was not just about punishing individuals. It was about holding the entire system accountable for the harm it caused. Despite the challenges he had faced, Marcus never lost sight of the bigger picture. He knew that his fight wasn't just about seeking justice for himself or for his family. It was about creating a world where his son, Jamal, could grow up without the fear of police brutality. It was about ensuring that future generations would not have to endure the same injustices he had faced. The foundation was his way of ensuring that the fight for justice would continue long after he was gone. As he watched Jamal grow into a young man, Marcus felt a sense of pride. His son had witnessed the entire ordeal. The trial, the media attention, the victories, and the setbacks, and had grown into a thoughtful, compassionate young man. Jamal was beginning to understand the complexities of the world around him and the importance of standing up for what was right. Marcus hoped that his son would one day take up the mantle and continue the work they had started together. One evening, as Marcus sat with Angela and Jamal at the dinner table, he felt a sense of peace. The battles were far from over, but he had made a difference. The changes he had fought for were starting to take root, and he had helped lay the foundation for a better future. As the conversation turned to the plans for the foundation's next phase, Marcus knew that the fight for justice was a journey, not a destination. And as he looked around at his family, his support system, his reason for fighting, he realized that, in the end, it wasn't just about the victories in the courtroom or the reforms in the streets. It was about creating a legacy of change, a legacy that would inspire others to continue the fight long after he was gone.